Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Family Reflections. This afternoon, I'm on the line with my mom and sister. It's a family affair today. um, Unfortunately, the subject matter is a little intense. It's a little heavy. And we're going to try our best not to make it feel as heavy as it is on your end, but we do think that it is something that we should touch on. It's something that we should discuss. This afternoon, we're discussing sexual assault in the Caribbean. It's a real thing. It's something that people seem to not really want to talk about. I just want to open the floor for my mom and sister to tell you a little bit about themselves, a little bit about their background.
And pastor's wife and a mother. And topic we are dealing with this afternoon is one I think that you need to feel comfortable with because it's actually happening to some of us, and we should be able to deal with it in an open manner so that we can get help when we need that kind of help or assistance.
All right, and Nadia?
Okay, I'm Nadia. I'm happy to be here with you this afternoon. I'm a social worker and a nurse by profession. So I'm hoping that I can provide with some information that will make us all more aware of what it is that we are dealing with when we have sexual assault and how we can assist more efficiently when we meet victims of sexual assault.
Right, absolutely. And before we hop into anything, I just want to give a quick definition of sexual assault. Right here on the web on Wikipedia, it tells us that sexual assault is an act in which a person intentionally sexually touches another person without that person's consent, or coerces or physically forces a person to engage in a sexual act against their will. It is a form of sexual violence which includes rape, groping, child sexual abuse, or the torture of the person in a sexual manner. And as I said, guys, I know this is a heavy discussion. It's a heavy topic, and I'm not going to pretend that we're going to be able to cover the entire scope on this episode. And so I just want to give a quick disclaimer to let you know that I am not an expert on this at all. My mom and sister, to varying degrees, much more experts on this than I am. My sister being a social worker with a background in nursing as well, and my mom being a teacher of many years, as she mentioned. So I just want to ask you guys right off the bat, how have you seen the effects of this sort of sexual violence in your careers or in your lives with other women?
So for me as a registered nurse and an emergency room nurse for several years, I have seen many persons reporting to emergency room with injuries as a result of an encounter with a perpetrator. Now, before I go on, I will further say that, as you rightly said in your definition, sexual assault it can be violent and it's forced. But when you have sexual assault, there is not always a physical sign, because sexual assault has a psychological component, emotional component, and a physical component. So you may not see the bruising, you may not see the red marks from any violence, because if we define it a little deeper, sexual assault is not simply rape where somebody forces intercourse on another person, but sexual assault is any sexual act that one does not consent to, and that may include sexual harassment. So you will not see any physical signs of sexual harassment. The person makes inappropriate sexual comments. Unwanted touching of a private part is sexual assault. Being forced to masturbate or to watch somebody else masturbate is sexual assault. Using an object to pleasure somebody who does not want to be pleasured is sexual assault. Voyeurism, watching somebody in their private moments, is sexual assault. making someone else watch pornography or sexual act is sexual assault. So we may not always see signs, it may not always be visible, but we have to be alert nonetheless to see that somebody is a victim of sexual assault. So for me, in my experience as a nurse, when you see somebody come in, maybe depression, signs of depression, because the person has, and sexual assault is not just one event, it may be a series of events. It may not happen just one time. It may be a child living with it over years. So over the years, that child's psychological and emotional aspects of their being is being eroded. So when we're looking at sexual assault, we're looking at a very complex dynamic. There's not always a black and white, plain or straight situation.
Right. And I think there's a lot to unpack there as well. But Mami, can you give us a brief synopsis of your experience as well, have how you've seen this issue impacting people in your own walk or your own career?
Well, most of the women I've met who have been assaulted display varied, dispositions. Some are quiet, very quiet, and the self-confidence is usually eroded. When in the classroom, I could tell when there was something drastically wrong with a child. I had students who would be very intelligent, very bright, and extrovert. And then all of a sudden, you'd see that child change to be a very quiet, an introvert, a very, as Nadia said a while ago, depressed person. That switching personality, that psychological aspect of things will tell you that this personality, something has happened to invade that person's private space. Anytime you penetrate that person's private space, then that individual, it's like an onslaught, war on that person's personality. And that's why I've always said that those persons who exercise those vices don't know how deep the victims are destroyed by those acts. You actually destroy the person's personality, the person's joy, the person, it's an attack on the personality. So there is always a change, and not for the better. It's always for the worst when someone goes through that kind of experience.
And you know, that's very sad in and of itself, and it makes me wonder why is it that society tends to shy away from talking about this? Why is it that society, and I do want to acknowledge that in recent years that is slowly beginning to change, especially in the United States with the advent of the Me Too movement. A lot of people are being brought to justice, but why do you think that, especially in the Caribbean, we still don't really, it's still sort of a hush hush sort of thing?
Okay, well, we have to look at some facts. With sexual assault, sexual abuse, those perpetrators are commonly known to their victims or the offenders. The majority of the offenders are male and they are known to their victims. And usually those are planned acts. And it's because the perpetrator wants to feel a sense of power and control. So when we look at why not, we have to look at full circle and every dynamic within that circle. So let's look at it as a pie or a pizza, and we take each slice of it. So you have the victim. The perpetrator is exercising power and control over that victim. So that victim now feels dominated and intimidated. So they're stifled. You have the perpetrator commonly, not always. We have females who are perpetrators as well. Let's not be fooled. But that male figure, so let's give that scenario to a young girl at her parents' house. the perpetrator is an influential person in society, her father. So her mom is a housewife and she is dependent on his support for her household. She is stifled because she thinks of what she will lose if she gives him up. The daughter is submissive to her father and she's at his house. He has, by virtue of him being her father, he already has authority over her. We look at his role in society as an influential person. Maybe he's a businessman and he has many employees. So if an employee says him, I might lose my job. Now, let's remember he has control, he has influence, he has power. He may have that intimidating persona that no one dares speak against him. Even the police, he may have friends in the force. We just be hypothetical. So you see, everybody in that circle thinks of what they are going to lose if they speak against, let's say, John Doe. So people are not ready to risk losing for you. So instead they make excuses. The mom may say that is not true. Well, the daughter may be shy to even say it in the first place. She may hold it just because it's her father. The mother, because of her fear of losing, will not speak up. Those he has power, control, of authority over will not want to speak because he can exercise his power over them. So we have to look at what everybody in that network suffers to lose by reporting and standing up against.
All right. So basically, everyone is acting in their own self-interest, right?
Right. And then everybody's acting in a self-preservation mode. And then the victim is left to fend for his or herself.
Right. So basically, from what you're saying, the victim is not only being silenced by society, but it's like an onion, right? There's levels of silence, and I guess that's why you find that sexual abuse and sexual assault are some of the most underreported and under-prosecuted forms of criminal attack, right?
Right. And then you have persons who during an encounter may have been under the influence of drugs or alcohol. They themselves, that's why it was able to happen. They were vulnerable, so they don't want to report it because they will seem, you don't know what you were saying, you were drunk. And then there's pride, the individual pride, that I don't want anybody to know that this happened to me. How people look at me after that, I'm damaged goods. So there's also a component of the victim wanting to keep their pride together, depending on the age.
So while you were saying that, I just thought of something interesting, right? Because while you mentioned that somebody being drunk or under the influence might be a reason why they might be discredited, what about an abuser, a criminal, a sexual criminal who does a violent act while under the influence? Is that an excuse for that person? How is that situation handled when, let's imagine a situation where a man is drunk and does something with a young girl who is underage? What happens to that man?
Well, that's off the record, but in my opinion, you would follow the same consequences as if you were sober, because we would have to be responsible adults to know that we don't let a habit get us to that stage where we're not coherent and we're not in our right frame of mind, that we do things that we don't know of. So because if it goes to the extent that you have no self-control, then that's a bad place that you're putting yourself. So you're telling me, let's be dramatic, that you commit murder while you're drunk, and you still have to pay the consequences. So it says to us as individuals that we have to be in control of, we have to exercise self-control, that we don't put ourselves in situations that we are vulnerable to doing acts that are against other persons that we have no recollection of. Let us always be in a state of mind where we are cognizant of what we're doing.
All right.
But then, Kelly, come to think of it, Nadia, that individual could also drink the rum or smoke the marijuana or whatever just to perform the act. You know,
Yeah.
no, le moun nan normal, il passe à faire vieux sleep. So, ça, il ka boire encore bon shot, mais il ka aller des petits mamay là, des petits mamay là. You know, because when he's normal, he feels that, you know, psychologically, he should not do that, perform that act. But it's in his mind like a cancer. So the best way to drown his senses and his morality is by going to the rum shop, you know, drink some rum and come back to the home nighttime when his wife is asleep, and then, you know, assaulted the child. You know, so you know, as Nadia said, this individual has to go through the very same penalty somebody who was stable.
Well, I'm going to be pushing the limits of this conversation a little bit, because I think all too often when we think of sexual assault, we think about men and bad men in bad situations doing bad things. And I want to highlight the fact that it's not just men. There are women who are abusing young boys and girls. There are women who are abusing men, and I think even more than domestic violence. When I spoke about domestic violence with Neva and Kendall in the last episode, even more than men being ashamed to report domestic violence, men are ashamed to report sexual violence that happens to them. So, you know, I'm going to be a champion for men in this conversation, and I want to call out the fact that, you know, it's not just men who are the perpetrators of these crimes, you know. But anyway, I want to say, well, not say, but something that I came across in my research before this episode was that statistically, and I'm not happy to report this, but apparently statistically, the Caribbean region is has one of the highest rates of sexual assault in the world. Um, Caribbean nations tend to have the highest rates of sexual assault. So I think it's very telling that we shy away from talking about it, yet we have some of the highest rates of that crime. Why do you think there's a parallel between those two things?
Can you repeat the question, Kedi?
So I said that statistically, the Caribbean region has some of the highest reported rates of rape in the world, apparently, and I think it's interesting that you have a region where the culture is to not talk about that kind of thing, yet it's apparently running rampant in the region. So do you think there's a parallel between it not being talked about and it being prevalent?
But that's exactly the case. See, when I found act, when I found by movie, I am doing something wrong, and I always escape. There is always a way of escape. Then naturally, I will always continue to practice it. There is always that thing called rangement, as Nadia said previously. Mm-hmm. You commit the act, and then the child's parents or the little boy's parents go to seek for legal advice, and in some cases you hear, you know, they settle the case because the mother needed money, the mother is poor, the mother wants money, so the mother sacrifices the child, let me put it that way, and they go and they take a little $5,000, $2,000, like I live through whole life as a young child, as an adult, until that individual dies. That's a demon affects that child until he actually don't casket. But that child's whole life was compromised for just $5,000, $2,000 the sell super store. I mean, we have, you know, people in the Caribbean, it's like we behave like we are always in need, and we don't understand the value of a life, the emotional value of a life, the physical value of a life. So we commit crimes, we do stuff, and we always want to escape. We don't want to fix ourselves, but we want a way of escape. And that's why we buy our way through. especially those who are educated, influential, and those who have money. Oh yes, they'll commit an act. Mwen ale, Mr. Paul, y ale dormi avec Paulina, la y fini ti mamay la, y ale de maman, ba mwen, na y ba $1,000, ça pas vrai, mais pour $2,000 avec ça fini. And we keep on doing the same thing over and over and over again. Whereas in the United States, in the countries like the United States, you know, like in London, whatever, you will not escape easily because people understand the effects of that kind of you know, assault on a young child or someone who is vulnerable. But I don't think the reason why it's prevalent in the Caribbean is because we have not really understood the dark side to it.
Do you think that's true that it's prevalent because we haven't understood the dark side of it, or it's prevalent because there's just less enforcement, or I guess in keeping with what you said, less education surrounding it?
And it's not just education as well. There are some law enforcers who are also involved. You know,
Sure.
so you never get anywhere.
Sure.
The person who has to protect you sometimes, they are the ones who, you know, destroy you. So you never know what's actually going on. It's everywhere, you know. So these are some of the issues that we face.
Yeah. And, you know, do you think it's also because it's almost, it's kind of accepted that this is a part of life? That sexual assault is a part of our lives, and if you're lucky, then and you do everything right, then it won't happen to you. It's almost like we put the accountability on the victims that, hey, yeah, if this happened to you, then you shouldn't have been there. You shouldn't have been doing that. You shouldn't have been wearing that. You should not have been walking there late at night. You shouldn't have had those friends that you were walking with, or you shouldn't have gone to that party in the first place. Is it a situation where we accept that this is part of life and you should be doing the things that you need to do to avoid it, more than we're saying that this is not acceptable and the person that's doing this is the person that's in the wrong? Is that sort of the line of thought?
I think it's a dismissal kind of thing where, you know, people don't want to deal with the truths. They understand very well because, I mean, it has not only happened to, you know, a small percentage of our population. It is something which has been prevalent. I mean, from historical times, from, you know, even the 1960s, let's put it that way. People have been hearing of such, you know, issues taking place in the communities. And it's not like they don't know about the effects because, you know, I'm sure whoever went through this back then, it affected them in the same way that we are being affected now. But it's always a cover-up. And as you just said, that's part of the cover-up, you know. C'est ou qui fait man yo ou mette pom shot sou et ou aller mette jip ça avec une belle figure ça avec une gros tete ça là avec une whatever. You know, ou savent c'est mon kay rep, ou savent yo kay for this, ou savent misia kay for that, you know. But the sick mind, you know, if you have a sick mind, you should know. If you don't have one, you should know that you, in spite of the way the individual is dressed, God gave you no right to go and, you know, rape the person and, you know, assault or whatever you plan to do. You have no right to do that. You understand? Because you are actually penetrating that individual's private space, and you cannot go in there and, you know, attack that individual in that way, whichever way you choose that would make that individual feel comfortable with herself or her personality.
All right. And Nadia, it looks like you just rejoined us. Just to show you where we are in the conversation, we were just discussing whether there is a general acceptance on the part of society that sexual assault is just a part of life, and that what should be happening is that victims should be adjusting their behavior so that they can avoid it. So basically, a young girl who's coming from the party late at night shouldn't have been going to the party. A young woman who was in the house alone with that man that assaulted her should not have been in the house. Instead of accountability being placed on the perpetrator, we have a culture now where it's kind of placed on the victims. What do you think about that?
Yes, I think society gets that Stockholm syndrome kind of. But we have to look at also that people have different ideas of different things, and some are cultural, some are from myths. So you have this person who has the ideology that if they sleep with a virgin or they get virgin blood that there's some disease they can get cured from. You have people who think that they should sleep with their daughter and they should be the one who takes her virginity. People have some different ideologies for different reasons that have been passed down in cultures. But I need to note to say that a victim should never feel that they call anything upon themselves. So no matter how you dress, it doesn't give anybody the right to violate you as a person. No matter if that person was nice to you, the kindness should not be forcefully repaid from you. So a guy you go to a bar or club or just to a restaurant and somebody offers you a drink. You don't owe him your body as payment. Thank you for your drink. If you wanted a drink, if you don't want it, no thank you. He doesn't have the right to you. Nothing gives anybody the right to any person's person. And we should be if we should be responsible adults in society to know that nobody has the authority over anybody's body because you did an act of kindness. So I gave you a job and I did you a favor, so you have to pay me back with your body whether you want to or not. And this is another and going back to the person being somebody who has authority. So a young girl goes to a job interview and she gets the job and he gives it to her. It could be from anything to a secretary to a maid. And the boss feels that, you know what, I'm doing you a favor. You poor, you don't have much, I'm doing you a favor. And to get some extra payments. That is wrong.
All right.
And the thing is, with sexual assault, most times we think it's for pleasure. Most times it's not. It's just for control and power. That's the thing about it. It's not about pleasure sometimes, or at all about pleasure. It's just a measure of control, because sexual assault can even happen within the context of a marriage. Some people have, and this may be a little ticklish for Christians who have the ideology that you have to be submissive to me in every aspect. But if a wife says to her husband, I am not in the mood today, he cannot forcefully have intercourse with her. If he does, it is considered sexual assault, even within the context of marriage.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, right? Because you mentioned that, well, I know I said that we can't really blame the victim, but isn't it true that there are some things that a young lady or a young man, remember I said I'm going to keep harping on the fact that this happens to men as well, a young lady or a young man can do to just avoid the possibility of being attacked? And if there are things that a young lady or a young man can do to avoid the possibility of being attacked, is there also a level of accountability for that person for not taking those actions?
Okay, I would say you are right and you are wrong, because when we look at sexual assault, it goes from the age of 0 to 100. We're saying that it's also against somebody you cannot speak or consent. So we have little children who are being sexually assaulted every day. It may not be with intercourse, but people may be using objects.
Yeah, but I want to point out that my question was directly towards
I'm getting to
Yeah.
it. I'm getting to it. So I'm saying what you're referring to is the middle of the spectrum. So I would say yes, that a young woman, I just said that to qualify that in the bracket of sexual assault victims, we have those who cannot help vigilance. But there is that small group who can be vigilant about what they do and how they act. So yes, if I notice this man is looking at me a certain way, I can avoid him totally. I can tell my mom that when I pass, this man gives me this a look. He says these things to me. He does that to me. Yes, those we have those. Well, they're not victims yet, but who are possible victims who can avoid it. So if you see, we say men are visual, and maybe that's why people say the way you dress is you were the one who caused it, because by nature men are visual, and if they see, they like to see. So
Women are
yes,
visual too. I just want to mention that.
yes, but men to the extreme of being visual. So yes, I agree. But then that's why that notion that you look for the way you dress. So if you know a man is a visual being and you keep dressing to appeal to him, then that's when people say, well, you look for it. And then it calls for a bit of responsibility on our part in the way we dress as well. Because you don't expect to be dressed in a certain way and then just pass by a man and doesn't even look at you. So yes, there is a limit of responsibility. But for the perpetrator, we're calling for accountability for your actions. You cannot avoid seeing what you saw, but you can control acting on what you saw.
Yeah, and you know that right there in what you said is a mystery for me, because I think there is something in the brain of a sexual criminal that that's just slightly off. Because as you mentioned, if a woman dresses a certain way and walks by, any man might look, right. It's natural to look, but what is it in the mind of a predator or a criminal that causes him to then not only look but decide to attack? And I know you mentioned that it's a lot of the time sexual abuse and assault is about power and ownership, so to
Control.
speak, control. But is that really as far as it goes? Is there more? Like, is there something
It's
else?
also planned. It's also planned. The events are also planned.
And that just makes my
So
question worse.
give me a scenario to what you talking about.
uh, so I guess
Something relatable.
let's say a scenario is there's a young man who admires a certain young woman and he sees her walking down the street every day, right? And after seeing her walking down the street for 2 months, he decides to go say hello, and he says a normal, natural hello, and they go out on a date, and then they get married and live happily ever after, right? That's one scenario. The other scenario is a young man who sees a young woman and he sees her walking down the street every 2 months, and instead of walking up to her and asking her out on a date, he waits one night after she comes from work and rapes and kills her. What is the difference in the minds of those two young men? What is the thing that caused one to click in a terrible direction and another one to click in a natural, normal direction?
Well, we have mental. I would say that under the bracket of mental illness. Uh, they say we all have a mental disorder to a certain degree. So I would attribute that more to a mental illness. Although you can have a scenario where this young man is seeing this young lady walking by for 2 months, and he's saying hi, hello, and she's acting like he doesn't even exist. She doesn't but say hi, okay, or acknowledge him, and he will commit the act to show her that I'm in control, I have power. I don't want to be bring doom and gloom into this conversation, but if you remember this young woman who was murdered, and on her body if I recall correctly, was written for your style. Not sure if you're old enough to remember that.
Yeah, I remember stories being told to me about that occurrence.
Yes. So you see, he felt that he didn't have control over her. So he had to hurt her to show that I finally got control and power over you, even if it cost you your life.
Right. And
I got my way with you. Because
so
he did sexually assault her before he ended her life.
so now before I continue, I just want to mention to the viewers who are looking at this right now, for the first time ever, we're actually recording this on Sunday, which is the day before you're seeing it. But I just want to encourage you to reach into the comments and let me know your thoughts on what we're saying. And also feel free to like and share if you feel that this content is something that people need to learn about and people need to be aware of. Now, Mami, you've been a little quiet on the line. What are your thoughts regarding this?
Oh, well, Nadia has been quite explicit, and I agree with most of what she has been saying, or else I would butt in. So you can ask me another question because I would what you just said in another language.
Okay, well, the other question I would ask, because she said something. Oh, go ahead, Nadia. Yeah, so Nadia, I wanted to hop on the fact that you mentioned you mentioned mental illness. Now, I think we have to be very careful when we mention mental illness, right? Because to some degree, I believe mental illness releases the perpetrator from guilt. Because if I'm saying that sexual abusers and sexual criminals have a mental illness, then can we really say that these people should be uh, put in jail for their actions when in reality they were just people that were mentally sick? It's like putting somebody in prison for the flu, right? Or putting somebody in prison because they have cancer. It's not exactly something that person could help. So then that just opens up an entirely new portion of the conversation, right?
When I say mental, you have people who have antisocial behavior. Most times we take antisocial behavior to think somebody doesn't want to be in a group. That is not what it is. We normally say, oh, I don't want to go to a party, and everybody say, oh, she's antisocial. No, it's not. It's not as simple as that. When you have somebody with an antisocial behavior, that is a sociopath.
All right.
So when I'm not thinking of merely making a mental disorder as an excuse, but an actuality that people are just out of whack with the way they think.
Okay. So you're not
And they should know. So
you're not go ahead.
An antisocial personality disorder would be they show no guilt or remorse for their behavior, and they violate laws, and they do things on impulse, and that is a genuine case, because somebody can be normal and just see somebody and kill them. You have to have a degree of mental illness to do that.
Well, that still leaves my point though, because when you say mental illness, somebody who is mentally ill is somebody who is suffering from the sickness as much as the person that they hurt. For example, if a schizophrenic person were to attack somebody in a mental institution, nobody says that the schizophrenic person is just a bad person that just beats up people. No, they say, oh no, that person has a problem. And so should we then say that a sexual abuser is somebody that just has a problem? Or are we saying that no, this is a person that chose to do a bad thing consciously and planned it out and then executed on it? You know?
And I would say it can be both. And when we look at mental disorders, let us not look at the ones that we know common mental disorders. There may be, if we look at the manual of mental disorders, you will see there are so many mental disorders that probably each and every one of us can get one from there.
Right.
So it is genuinely a mental disorder. It's an excuse for the behavior, because people, we all function fine, but we all have a degree of mental illness. But it is a factor.
So basically, having the mental illness does not prevent you from actually being responsible or accountable for the decision that you made, is what you're saying, right?
Agreed. Agreed. Yes. Right.
Okay. That one is a heavy one for me because it kind of grays the lines a little bit. Um, I don't know. That
Well,
one is
well, remember I said there are people who do it for various reasons. There are those who want to just because a myth says if you have sex with a virgin, then you'll be cured. There are those who believe for superstition and other practices that they need virgin blood for X, Y, and Z. We have all of those kinds of things. How true, what extent of truth there is to them, I cannot validate. But we have different reasons why people commit those acts.
right.
And some have nothing to do with mental illness, and some do.
Now, this next question I want to direct directly to my mom here. Um, there's a running question on whether someone who is an abuser is always an abuser, or is there some level of redemption possible for sexual abusers? Like if someone, let's imagine a situation where a man molests a young child, or he molested a young child, and he went to prison, he served his time, and he comes out of prison. Is he forever in the eyes of society forever a child abuser, or is there a path for him back to normalcy, or some sort of normalcy or forgiveness from the child and society? Or is this something that once you do it, there's no going back, you're done for life?
There is nothing, in that way that we can, just brand someone as, a permanent, sexual abuser. I mean, the same way, whatever sin, moral, immoral act one commits, you cannot, just brand that individual as it were a permanent, abuser, no matter whatever it is. Because that person who goes in there can repent, can get counseling whilst he is incarcerated, and realize that what he has been practicing or what he has practiced is evil and has a dire effect on the life of another individual. And if this person has a conscience, and by God's grace, God's help, he can turn around and realize the magnitude and the dark edges of what he has done. This individual can turn around 360 degrees and just stop, practicing what he used to practice before. But we can only say that lightly. In reality, when certain individuals who have been incarcerated leave the prison walls and they are back into society, many of us, still have that, concept that this person, Monsa take a viole I don't want to go near that person, or when it is dark and I see the person on the road, I better run for my life, and things like that. This is natural, but it should not be something that you pin on someone. And even if you see the person demonstrating, you know, um, certain ways, and I mean, you see the person is trying to rehabilitate and get back into society in a constructive and should not give that person a chance. But again, I would say you still have to be careful, because there are some individuals, they tell you, well, Les moi aller la jol, moi habitué aller la jol, ça me te fait aller bay la pour moi still ka vivre pour moi aller encore. You know, so you have to be careful, but at the same time you have to give peace a chance. You have to give someone a chance. That's whatever you'd want someone to do for you, that you have to do for another person. If you were in that person's shoes, you have gone to jail for that crime. I mean, and you return to your community, you would want to look at you and behave, you know, in a cordial manner with you and show you that at least you can, you know, you can be a better person. So, you know, it goes both ways. But naturally, I know for sure, let's be realistic. People will not just embrace the individual, especially if that person raped and killed somebody. They will not just embrace you and leave you in the house with their daughter. I would not do it myself, you know, unless I know that you are sound again and you have repented and you are rebuilding, you know, your yourself, you know, your character.
Yeah, well, I think even from what you just said, there's a lot of nuance there because it's difficult to determine when a person is actually rehabilitated. And even when the person is rehabilitated, you don't know if they will have a relapse of some sort. You don't know if, because basically the same mental illness that I was just discussing with Nadia, is there any real evidence that prison time fixes that? Do we have evidence that even therapy really changes a sexual offender? And I'm not saying this as somebody who's done research. I'm just genuinely curious. What do you think, Nadia?
I would say in some cases it does, and in other cases it doesn't. Like I said before, not everything is black and white. Even for some perpetrators, you'll find that they are damaged themselves. So that person who need a lot of work on themselves to have a change within them so that they can change. And if they do not get that help from being in prison, then they will only continue. And it goes back to me saying that it's a mental, it's some people are mentally ill. It means, you know, if it may not be an actual diagnosed mental illness, sometimes it may be a psychological pathway that needs to be changed.
All right, so more of a mental deviation than
But
it is an actual illness, right?
yes, right. And I've also witnessed someone who was a perpetrator of sexual assault did their time in prison and have been reunited with their family. And I cannot tell you I don't live with them, so I cannot say to which extent that the family has healed. But for that semblance of unity, I don't have to take a lot of forgiveness on everybody's part.
All right.
Maybe even the victim feeling forgiving themselves for sending him to prison and having him back at home now, for him having caused his family so much pain while he was in prison and they had to fend for themselves. But it does happen that victims and perpetrators, when they're family, they reunite, and it seems that they move on from there. How often that happens and how easy it is for that to happen, I cannot tell you, but it is possible.
Interesting. And, you know, I think this is a touchy one for me, but I think a sexual abuser who is watching this and is afraid of calling justice on his or herself, or actually turning his or herself in, I think this is actually encouragement to you to do the right thing and turn yourself in and face justice for what you've done, and seek therapy for your issue. And there might be light on the other side of the tunnel. Um, you know, I think there's some people that potentially regret doing the things that they did, and afraid that if they try to turn themselves in, that there's no hope on the other side for them. And from what we're saying here, I think we're making it clear that there is the possibility of hope, there is the possibility of rehabilitation, and I think that's very important, and that might change the narrative for a lot of different people. Now, I just want to hop over to one more thing. In the United States, there's, as I mentioned earlier, the Me Too movement. And the Me Too movement has done a lot of great work in terms of calling awareness in the culture and empowering women to speak out and to just make their voices heard when it comes to sexual assault and sexual abuse. But there are also instances of men who have been accused falsely. There are many politicians sometimes who are just beginning to gather some momentum in a given campaign, and all of a sudden you start seeing sexual abuse allegations. And all it takes is an allegation to completely change the campaign, or change the amount of sponsorships that you have, or really an allegation can sometimes end a man's career. What do you think is the balance between making sure that victims are heard and also ensuring that accused men aren't automatically guilty until proven innocent?
That's a ticklish one, because how do you strike that balance, and how do you, because we have the French and the British, they have different takes on guilt and innocence. One says you're innocent until proven guilty. The other says you're guilty until you're proven innocent. And that's for two different reasons. I would think that some are politically motivated to do that, and it is wrong. And these practices are what that cripple the justice system in those instances. And it is unfortunate that these things happen. Equally wrong for a man to do it than, and for a woman to accuse a man who's innocent about it. I think it's equally wrong. In the Caribbean, we have a very different approach to allegations of sexual assault, I would say. It's not as forceful or as impacting as it is in the US, because in the Caribbean you will hear somebody, because of our concepts, like we said earlier on, you will hear a woman say that this politician did this to me, and then you will hear somebody say, but you're a big woman, you probably wanted to be with him or something like that, only because he does not want to be with you now, you sing that now. So I think our cultures are very different, and our approach to it is very different.
All right.
And that brings up to me which one is really better, because in American culture you can easily say an untruth about a man and it's taken seriously, and here in our culture it really does happen, but we sideline it. So I really don't know how to say something on that aspect yet.
It's kind of, yeah, it's kind of two sides of the same coin, right? On one end, right, there's great awareness for it, and there are instances of false allegations. And then on the other end, there's not enough awareness, and people don't make the allegations that they need to get the justice that they deserve, right? So, Mommy, on your end, do you see any potential solution for that sort of thing?
The only solution is educating people about the issue and allowing them to know that it is not as bad as they think, and they should not be as secretive about it as they are right now, that they can get help. And but at the other end of the ladder, as I said, sometimes they are speaking the truth and they are not taken, seriously. Sometimes people just dismiss the case, they start the legal procedures and whatever, and next thing you never hear about that case again, right, in our Caribbean, society. And that's what keeps on happening. But in America, it gets to be a big deal on CNN, all radio stations and whatever, and everyone hears about it. So your your career can get destroyed easily. But here you just hear about it today and tomorrow it's gone. So in the cultures again, you have to know where you are. Whatever transpires in the United States cannot really take place there and be handled there. Construct the culture because of lack of education, because of the way we perceive things. Again, it's still our culture, it's our lifestyle, our way of life. So the best thing, as we have discussed that whole issue, the best thing I think one can do for himself or herself is to be on guard, to take care, to educate yourself, and then if it happens, deal with it in the right way. You cannot just, give an eye for an eye, but at the same time, you can report it and keep on pursuing the case until you win.
Now, I want to jump.
Because
I want
the
to jump.
minute you
Go ahead.
what I'm saying is, most of the times we give up. With the same, whatever is going on in America now when it comes to racism, I look at the case in that very same way. I mean, for ages, 100 years and older, I mean, we've been struggling as Black people. We have been saying, and we know for a fact that our lives matter. But then, we just, relax. After all, civil rights leaders have tried their best. We keep going through the same motion. But for now, I say the time has come. You just have to keep on moving on. You have to keep on believing in yourself, and you have to believe in the fact that one day things will change, So we just cannot give up. Although the cultures are different, they are dealt with, the issues are dealt with differently, but we have to believe when things happen to us, we have to believe that, something good can come out of it and pursue it.
Right. And I agree with that, but I just wanted to point out, because at the beginning of your statement there, you mentioned that we have to let victims know that it's not so bad. Just because of the nature of the discussion.
I said it's not so. It is not, because people make you feel that if you report, if you go to the legal, officers, whoever, and you report it, it's a bad thing because you're telling them about what happened to you, and people will look at you and it will damage good. As Nadia said, you'll not get a good man to marry you because you have been raped, you have been abused. You understand? So we have to let them know that's what I wanted to say, that it is not that bad. As a beautiful young woman, if you have been raped, I don't think that can prevent a decent man from marrying you. If they understand that it's not your fault, it is you are the victim, you understand? So that's what I really meant. It's not that bad. Don't allow people to make you feel that it is bad. So you should just keep the skeleton in the closet. No, don't do that.
Right.
Deal with it.
I want to interject here on that note. I want victims to always remember that it is not their fault, it's not something they called on themselves. But I also want anybody who has been a victim to get the necessary help. You may think that you're okay, and you may be operating on autopilot mode, going through your day like you're a normal person. But there will be a time, and there will come a time when it will all come tumbling down. There are people who for years have been able to function normally and to seem perfect. But at a time, for example, this person who maybe as a child was molested, and they went through school, performed well, excelled, got married, never divulged to their spouse that they were a victim of abuse. You will find that at a time in their marriage that issues will come up that will remind them of the incidents, whether it be in intimacy or anything else, and then they will start acting out. And the spouse, not knowing from where this is coming, may misinterpret the actions,
right,
and react, and it will be disastrous. Whereas if the spouse knew and saw the signs or the display would know where it's coming from, and be a support. So you find people who've had those these past, their relationships crumble because they do not seek help, the necessary help. They keep things away from their partners, and there comes a time where some things just manifest, and neither one knows how to deal with it, and then the marriage or relationship crumbles. This is not a hypothetical thing. These are things that actually happen. So I advise a victim that even before you want to go into a relationship, whether it be dating, whether it be for marriage, whether it be for just living together, find the help for yourself first before you bring it over to your relationship with your partner. If not, it will blow up one day, and it may not be for the best.
Absolutely. And I think that point is also a point that can be expanded a little bit, because I think the same thing applies to many other issues with that people deal with in relationships. You have to ensure that you deal with your emotional issues, deal with the emotional baggage that uh, uh, everyone encounters issues in life and issues along the way of their life journey that they need to deal with, or else these things are brought into your intimate relationships and may actually destroy it with time if not addressed. Um, Now, unfortunately, we are at the end of our time. In fact, we're actually over our time. And I want to just give both of you opportunity to just express how you think changes can be made either with our education system or with our culture that can stem the tide or change the narrative around sexual abuse, sexual assault in the Caribbean.
I would say that with the generations changing, that individuals are becoming more vocal. They are more aware that they have a voice. But I would want us to be more encouraging, more supporting. I like victims to know that you can find somebody to speak to. You go to the hospital, find a doctor. These people are bound by codes of ethics and confidentiality. So you have a social worker, you have a doctor, a nurse. Speak to somebody, reach out to somebody to get the help that you need. Because at the end of the day, you will not be okay if you don't.
All right.
You will find yourself going round and round in circles, and it will affect every aspect of your life, your confidence, how successful you are as a person, how confident you are, how you live, how you see life, your outlook, how optimistic you are. So I would encourage everybody to look out for signs in the in their loved ones and friends and relatives. If you see sudden behavior changes, you see the person withdrawn, looking depressed, you see physical signs, you see a child um, behaving differently, keep your eyes open, and let's be a little more confident in our communities. We like to talk sometimes, and that talk we do does not help those around us. So if we see something, we spread it everywhere, and then it comes back not in the way that it's supposed to come back. If you see something, you act on it in a nice, friendly, confidential, genuine way. And I think that the approach we have to it is what emboldens or what deters a victim from reaching out to us. Before they speak, everybody already knows their business will happen to them. But if somebody knows that if I speak to this person, they will help me move forward, and nobody else will know what they're helping me for, then they'll be more apt to reach out than to if I tell you, by the time I've said it, the whole world will know, and everybody will look at me, oh, this is not going to happen too. Think of yourself as an individual. How would you feel, and what would you want? And then you will know how to reach out and react to situations. And that's how we can help. The first step in helping.
All right. All right. And Mami, what are your final statements on it?
Yeah, and I think Nadia has, said everything that I would have said. Mhm.
All right. Well, folks, I want to thank you for once again joining another episode of Family Reflections. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Make sure to like the Ianola Pictures page so you don't miss any updates. Go to www.ianolapictures.com and join our mailing list. We are here every other week on Mondays at 6 p.m. I want to thank my mom and sister for joining us on this episode. And we're looking forward to having a greater, more detailed conversation with you in the comments. So if you have thoughts, if you have experiences, God forbid, that you want to share with us, and maybe we can effect some change just from this episode alone. It's not too much to hope for. So once again, thanks for joining us. Have a good one.
Bye.